The Second World War and the recent conflict in the Persian Gulf have made perfectly clear the absolute necessity of air superiority in gaining the military victory. With that in mind, the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy in 1986 awarded two preliminary competing contracts for the 21st Century Fighter, officially designated the Advanced Tactical Fighter, or the ATF. A totally awesome combat aircraft with twice the capability and power of today's top-of-the-line fighters. Vigorously competing for the title and some $64 billion worth of production contracts were two consortiums made up of the giants of the U.S. aerospace industry. The Lockheed Group created the YF-22 and the Northrop team the YF-23. One each of the YF-22s and YF-23s is powered by twin GE F-120 jet engines, and the others by the Pratt & Whitney F-119 jets. Before the dawn of the 21st century, at least one of these super air fighters will obsolete today's great U.S. battle planes. Our Air Force's F-15 Eagle and F-16 Fighting Falcon. The Navy's F-14 Tomcat and the F-A-18 Hornet. And the best of the Russian fighters, the MiG-29 Fulcrum and Su-27 Flanker. While the U.S. aircraft industry has produced the greatest air superiority fighters, starting with the North American Aviation P-51 Mustang in World War II and the F-86 Saberjet in the Korean War, this has not always been the case. When the U.S. entered the First World War in 1917, we were relatively unprepared. Despite the fact that the airplane was invented in Dayton, Ohio by the Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville, who first flew in 1903 over the sand dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And although the Wrights produced the world's first military aircraft for the U.S. Army in 1908, not a single American-built or designed fighter plane flew or fought in World War I. Before the U.S. entered the war, American volunteers in the French Lafayette Escadrille flew the early French Nieuport Scouts, models 11 and 17. As mentioned, the first fighters were called Scouts because they were originally employed for reconnaissance. 2 years later, when the U.S. entered the war, fledgling American Air Service pilots flew French Nieuport 28s and SPAD 13s. Here, we see America's First World War ace of aces, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, with his 94th Hat in the Ring Aero Squadron. Other American aces, like Lieutenant George Vaughan and Captain Elliot White Springs, who trained and fought and flew with the British Royal Air Force and the predecessor, Royal Flying Corps, flew the legendary British Sopwith Camel and SE-5. With the armistice, the infant American aircraft industry did get down to brass tacks and produced some great fighters during the peacetime years of the 1920s and 30s. Among those were the Grumman F-2F and F-3F Navy fighters, the early Curtiss P-1, 3, 5, and 6 Army planes, and Boeing, which we know today as the great builder of multi-engine bombers and great civilian airliners, built the classic Army P-12 and Navy F-4B-4, and the revolutionary first all-metal low-wing monoplane fighter, the P-26 Pea-Shooter. The P stood for Pursuit. The Scouts were now Pursuit planes. They kept that title until after the Second World War, at which time they were designated F for Fighter, which remains to this day. The U.S. entered World War II with the Army Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, made famous by the Flying Tigers, and the Navy Grumman F-4F Wildcat. To better counter the Japanese Zero, Grumman brought out the improved F-6F Hellcat, which fought alongside the Vought F-4U Corsair. Best of the Army Air Force fighters were the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, Lockheed P-38 Lightning, and topped by the great North American Aviation P-51 Mustang. 1950 saw the outbreak of the Korean War, the world's first jet war. North American Aviation's F-86 Saberjets tangled with Russian-built MiG-15s over the 38th parallel, and beat them to the tune of 10-1. Navy jets included the McDonnell F-2H Banshee and Grumman F-9F Panther, the first carrier jet to shoot down a MiG-15. American arms were tested once again over Vietnam in the mid-1960s and 70s. The principal American fighter was the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II, which was the mainstay of both the Air Force and the Navy. Few North Vietnamese MiG-17s, 19s, and 21s went aloft to challenge the U.S. forces, and Phantoms and Republic F-105 Thunder Chiefs ruled the sky. A short incursion into Panama before Christmas 1989 to oust the dictator General Manuel Noriega saw the baptism of fire of the till then top-secret U.S. Air Force Lockheed F-117A stealth fighter. A little more than a year later, early on 17 January 91, an F-117 stealth dropped the first bomb of Operation Desert Storm in the Persian Gulf War. That 2,000-pound paveway smart bomb accurately destroyed the Iraqi Air Force headquarters in Baghdad. The stealth was joined by Air Force McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle and Strike Eagle air superiority fighters. Lockheed Martin's F-16 Fighting Falcons, Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II tank busters, and Navy Grumman F-14 Tomcats. McDonnell Douglas FA-18 Hornets, and Harrier jump jets, and Grumman A-6 Intruders, along with Army AH-64 Apache and Army and Marine AH-1 Cobra choppers. As in Vietnam, not many Iraqi fighters accepted the challenge or rose to do battle. Those that did, Russian-built MiGs and French-built Mirage F-1s, fell before coalition air forces' air-to-air missiles. The rest of the enemy air force hid or fled to neutral Iran. Following a 100-hour ground war, the ceasefire took place on 28 February 91. Our Desert Storm aircraft are the fighters we have today. But what about tomorrow, the future, the 21st century?
I'd like to talk for a moment about why we're developing a new fighter at this time. There's probably not a person in this room or in the reach of your television cameras who isn't aware of the contribution of stealth to our success in Desert Storm. In that case, it was a bombing capability that we were seeing in action. But the principle will apply to both ground attack and air-to-air missions in the future. The ATF is intended to replace the aging F-15 Eagle, currently our frontline fighter. The Air Force's F-15s are outstanding aircraft, and they swept the skies in Desert Storm. However, when the ATF is first deployed, the F-15s will be over 25 years old. Several other aircraft, including some we faced in Desert Storm, are aerodynamically competitive today with the F-15 and other leading U.S. fighters. We win today with an edge in avionics and by relying on the superior skill and training of our pilots. Others will try to close that gap between now and the year 2002, when the first ATF squadron is fielded. The ATF will balance stealth, supercruise, and advanced avionics in a highly maneuverable fighter that will ensure that our pilots get first look and first kill. Thus, the ATF will ensure American air superiority well into the next century. As we have seen in Desert Storm, air superiority is essential to effective air and ground operations. American ground forces have not had to fight without air superiority since 1942, and we plan to keep it that way as well.
The Advanced Tactical Fighter, or ATF, is being developed to counter the increasing sophistication and threat of hostile air superiority forces around the world. This fighter will provide air superiority for the tactical air forces in the late 1990s and well into the 21st century. Its predecessors, the F-15 Eagle, entered the Air Force inventory in 1975 and will be 25 years old by the time the first ATF becomes operational. And the F-14 Tomcats joined the Navy about the same time. Threats which the F-15 and F-14 can no longer counter will be defeated by the lethal and survivable ATF, with its balance of increased speed and range, enhanced offensive and defensive avionics, and reduced observability. Emphasis on reliability, maintainability, and other effectiveness factors will keep the fighter flying in the harshest combat conditions with quick combat servicing. The increased logistics supportability engineered into the ATF means fewer resources will need to be committed for each ATF squadron at forward locations. The U.S. Air Force manages the program through the ATF Systems Program Office at Air Force Systems Command's Aeronautical Systems Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Because of the work done at the Wright Laboratory located there, the ATF features new advanced technologies never seen before on one weapon system. Its 4 S's, stealth, survivability, supersonic cruise, and supportability, are ensured because of the pioneering work of the laboratories. Development of the ATF prototypes will prove the ability of new technologies to enable the Air Force to satisfy operational requirements of tactical air command, thus maintaining our technological edge in air superiority. The Navy has also participated in the Demonstration Validation, or DEMVAL program, to develop a Navy variant called the NATF, or Navy Advanced Tactical Fighter, suitable for deployment from aircraft carriers to replace the formidable F-14 Tomcat. The services are taking advantage of the resulting opportunities to share design elements where the differing Air Force and Navy missions permit. For example, the services are seeking commonality in engines, avionics, materials, and subsystems. The ATF will fly and fight in the advanced radar networks and dense surface-to-air missile environments of combat throughout the world. It will use a first-look, first-shot, first-kill capability to detect and destroy enemy fighters of today and tomorrow. The 2 competing prime weapon system contractor teams for the ATF were headed by Lockheed Aeronautical Systems Company in Burbank, California, and Northrop Corporation in Hawthorne, California. Lockheed was teamed with Boeing military airplanes in Seattle, Washington, and General Dynamics in Fort Worth, Texas. Northrop was teamed with McDonnell Aircraft Company in St. Louis, Missouri. As stated earlier, Lockheed's prototype was designated the YF-22A. Northrop's was the YF-23A. 2 prototype air vehicles have been produced by each contractor team for a total of 4. Each team has expertise in stealth technology, Lockheed being the manufacturer of the F-117A stealth fighter that proved itself so effective in Operation Desert Storm. And Northrop is the producer of the B-2 stealth bomber. In addition, through the years, each consortium has manufactured a long, impressive list of great fighting aircraft. Lockheed made the P-38 Lightning of World War II fame. And the F-80 Shooting Star, America's first jet fighter for the Korean War. Along with the C-130 Hercules and the giant transports, the C-141 Starlifter, and C-5 Galaxy, and the super reconnaissance spy planes, the U-2, TR-1, and SR-71. General Dynamics created the great compact multi-role F-16 Fighting Falcon, the F-111 Tactical Strike Aircraft, and the World War II B-24 Liberator Heavy Bomber. Boeing gave us the great bomber series, ranging from the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-29 Super Fortress of the Second World War, to the aging B-52 Stratofortress that performed so well in Operation Desert Storm, and the KC-135 tanker, and going back to the 20s when Boeing built the U.S. Navy's F-4B-4 biplane fighters, and U.S. Army Air Service's P-12, and the classic P-26 P-Shooter, the first low-wing metal monoplane fighter. General Dynamics produced the Delta Wing F-102 and F-106 fighters. The competing contractor team can claim the Northrop P-61 Black Widow night fighter of the Second World War, and the F-5 Freedom Fighter of Vietnam fame. And McDonnell Douglas has manufactured today's F-15 Eagle Air Superiority Fighter, and the predecessor, Air Force and Navy F-4 Phantom, that ruled the skies over Vietnam. The amazing Harrier vertical short takeoff and landing attack aircraft. The U.S. Navy and U.S. Marine Corps F-A-18 Hornet Strike Fighter, and the venerable A-1 Sky Raider, affectionately called the SPAD in Vietnam, and the Douglas A-4, which also saw combat in Operation Desert Storm with the Free Kuwait Air Force. And Douglas also produced the classic DC-3 airliner, which served in World War II as the C-47. And today's triple jet DC-10, the U.S. Air Force KC-10 tanker. And the new C-17 cargo transport, which can land large payloads on remote airstrips around the world. Reliability and maintainability have joined the traditional factors of cost, schedule, and operational performance when we measure the success of a weapon system. The Advanced Tactical Fighter Development Team sought to double the reliability of today's best fighters and to simplify the maintenance workload of ground crews. These goals promise reduced manpower and logistics requirements and fewer airlift sorties to equip and maintain forward-based ATFs. The ATF features increased survivability made possible by its use of reduced observable or stealth technologies and advanced sensors. It is also highly maneuverable and cruises at supersonic speeds without use of afterburners, factors which give the ATF a decided edge over traditionally designed fighters. The powerful combination of speed and stealth will substantially reduce the surface-to-air missile threat to the ATF, as clearly shown in the chart, while today's F-15 and F-16 will face a practically insurmountable barrier. As for lethality, We are talking about first look, first shot, and first kill. Today's F-16 is the equivalent of the Russian MiG-29 Fulcrum, and the F-15 is a match for their Su-27 flanker. On the other hand, the ATF can engage today's top Russian fighter long before the Su-27 even knows he's there. And the ATF will have a considerable edge over the Russian stealth advanced threat fighter, currently under development. Also, along with the F-16 Falcon, the F-117A and B-2 stealth fighter and bomber, the 21st century fighter shares the amazing fly-by-wire control system, which allows the pilot to command the aircraft totally through a system of electrical wires rather than conventional complex mechanical systems with pulleys, linkages, and push rods. This new generation of avionics is one of the factors that allows a single ATF pilot to handle the heavy workload of a two-man fighter crew. Today's F-15 Eagle and F-14 Tomcat air superiority fighters, the F-A-18 Hornet, and the Vietnam War era F-4 Phantom require two men to do the job. Designers of ATF avionics are also using technologies such as VHSIC, or Very High-Speed Integrated Circuits, in the development of advanced data processors. These VHSIC chips offer three main advantages over conventional integrated circuits: dramatic increases in both processing speed and power, and smaller size. The ATF avionics system makes traditional black box systems obsolete. ATF avionics are augmented by technologies such as the Integrated Electronic Warfare System, Integrated Communications, Navigation, Identification Avionics, shared antenna for several avionics systems, and cockpit displays that show integrated data from not one, but several sensor systems. The Joint Integrated Avionics Working Group's task is to develop common avionics specifications and use them in aircraft delivered in the late 90s and beyond. This group was assembled from the program offices of the ATF, the Army Light Helicopter, the Navy A-12, and agencies developing variants of these aircraft. The group's strategy is to focus on avionics module commonality so that users can, to a great extent, use a single avionics inventory. They balance the economic advantages of common avionics with a need for tailored systems, and their interfaces with the aircraft itself are included in the effort. Its airframe design is truly revolutionary. The ATF has greater cruise efficiency and superior handling characteristics compared to most of today's fighters. Fiber optics, advanced aerodynamic designs, and digital flight controls contribute to the increased flight capabilities. The airframe is lighter because of extensive use of high-strength, low-weight composite materials. The ATF engines propel the 21st century fighter at supersonic cruise speeds without using afterburners, a revolutionary capability. ATF engines have two-dimensional convergent revolutionary maneuverability and are able to vector thrust to 20 degrees. As for weapons, the advanced tactical fighter carries a full complement of medium and short-range air-to-air armament, including the AIM-120 Advanced Medium-Range Air-to-Air Missile, or AMRAAM, and the AIM-9 Sidewinder. Unlike today's fighters, which carry their missiles externally on their wingtips, under their wings and fuselages, ATF weapons are carried internally by a system that is highly classified and can be launched from revolutionary weapons racks, which are hydraulically operated. To meet the stringent requirements set by the two military services, each of the competing prototypes features low radar, low infrared, and low visual signatures, stealth technology, and both employ blended wing body design, man-made composition to replace weaker, heavier metal. One striking example of the advanced technology employed is the fact that ATF prototypes have super-cruised, supersonic speed without afterburner, at speeds in excess of Mach 1.5, or 1.5 times the speed of sound, outdistancing F-15 Eagle chase planes which use their afterburners. This feature alone extends the ATF's range and enhances its survivability. Both ATF contenders have undergone exhaustive tests and trials, including the weapons firing. And the YF-22 has demonstrated a spectacular anti-spin device. And now for the payoff. The Air Force made its choice of the manufacturer team and the engine producer that got the full-scale development or engineering and manufacturing contracts. 2 months after the Desert Storm victory, on April 23, 1991, Air Force Secretary Donald B. Rice announced the multi-billion-dollar fighter airframe and engine decision for 648 to 750 aircraft.
The DEMVAL phase has accomplished the risk reduction and the design trade-offs that are its purpose. Its success is demonstrable in the excellent performance of the prototypes and the quality of the proposals from the contractor teams. To ensure the fairest possible evaluation of these outstanding designs and development teams, the evaluation process that we've been through has been intensive, thorough, and professional. That evaluation was conducted by Air Force and Navy teams, by a team involving both Air Force and Navy personnel, included not only the developer community, but users, testers, contracts experts, cost analysts, and all who would be involved in the next phase of development. The success of the demonstration validation phase and this formal evaluation process is also demonstrated by the fact that the evaluators were able to bring to me as the source selection authority 4 awardable contracts, each of which represented acceptable proposals that met Air Force requirements. However, in evaluating the engine and airframe proposals, one combination clearly offered better capability with lower cost, thereby providing the Air Force with a true best value. With all that said, I now announce that the ATF team will be composed of the Pratt & Whitney company who designed the F-119 engine, which will be integrated into the F-22, designed by Lockheed, team with Boeing and General Dynamics.
And the winners are the Lockheed team and Pratt & Whitney. Clearly, the advanced tactical fighter represents the greatest advancement in aerospace technology since the invention of the jet engine and rocket propulsion.